America. We have one presentation reserved for today by Barbara Moser from University of Geneva on higher education and emergencies, learning pathways. And this presentation focuses on the design, development and implementation of higher education programs through digital learning. And after the presentation by Barbara, we will have a panel session together with Barbara, Olga from the Open University of the Netherlands, and the two of us, Piet Hendricks and myself. And so in the panel, we can discuss the presentation by Barbara, but also input from other contributions this week. Rest me to tell you that this meeting will be recorded and will be available after the meeting as well in our YouTube channel. Okay, so please, Barbara, the floor is yours for your presentation. I guess that Bo will click for the. Oh, I can do that myself here. Yeah, for your presentation. Here you are. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. And well, welcome to a fragile context. So I'll try and walk you through some of the through the potential and the opportunities that virtual learning and virtual mobility presents to learners who are certainly not living in the same conditions as most university students in the global north, or even university students in the global south. They are not in brick and mortar buildings, but most of them are accessing higher education through different types of devices in low bandwidth, low resource environments, many of them in refugee camps. That is actually the context that the University of Geneva in Zone is most experienced in. And maybe I should just give you a quick overview of the places we do work in. We have 3 implementation sites, 2 in Kenya, and the 2 largest refugee camps in Kenya, called Kakuma, with about 180,000 refugees, multilingual environment, 45 different languages. Most of the refugees come, as you would imagine, from the Horn of Africa, the Great Lakes region. The majority of them are South Sudanese, but also a large number of refugees from Rwanda, Burundi, Chad, the DRC, etc. The other large refugee camp we work in is Dadaab. Dadaab is quite a different camp. It used to have 500,000 refugees living there. Through different policy changes within Kenya, the population is now down to 230,000, which still makes it a fairly large camp, covering a large surface area right on the border of Somalia. There, the population is not multilingual. All refugees living in Dadaab are Somali refugees, and so it's Somali and English, English being the host country language. And the third implementation site is, in a way, our smallest refugee camp. It's on the border of Syria. It is in Jordan. It's called Azraq Refugee Camp. Some of you may have heard of Zaatari Refugee Camp, which was the first one that Jordan authorized to be built. Azraq was built in very different ways, following the Zaatari experience. A lot more regulation, much tighter regulations, constraints, access constraints. But essentially, it's a camp, refugee camp that was designed like an architect would design a city environment, but with 17,000 identical shelters, making it very difficult, I think, for anyone to find their way, especially for children. So those are the 3 big sites. Azraq has about 56,000 refugees, and they're very clearly all Syrian refugees. And in none of these camps is there a great deal of hope at this point that the camps would close down or that the refugees would be able to go back to their country of origin. For political reasons, resettlement of refugees in third countries has really come to a grinding halt, and that really is somehow the backdrop for higher education to begin to come in. Clearly, we're not in any way humanitarian actors, but we're operating much more on the development side, but we do operate in humanitarian context. So in a way, we're straddling this divide between humanitarian and development. And that comment is, I would want to underline, not without its importance, because humanitarian support is financed differently from development support in most countries, whether it's in Europe or anywhere else in the world. And the whole idea of actually going as far as offering higher education opportunities is relatively new. We started working virtually with people in fragility over 11 years ago, but the higher education dimension and offering a spectrum of courses and programs really did not get launched until 2013. So it's been just about 5 or 6 years that we have been operational. And I think one of the first things that is important for us to point out is that higher education in these contexts needs to meet needs that are quite different in many ways from the needs a student would have, even a refugee student would have, let's say coming to Germany or coming to the Netherlands or coming to any other country. We always need to bear in mind that we are beginning to build the higher end of the education spectrum, which is not covered by international law. International refugee law covers primary and secondary education, and that is the obligation of the host country. There is no obligation on part of the host country to offer higher education to refugees. So from an international law perspective, any kind of entitlement or legal entitlement needs to be derived from the human right to education, which is exactly what we do. And you may think, well, why do we need to have a legal basis? Anyone operating in a humanitarian context does have to have a legal basis. So a lot of that work clearly is necessary and is a kind of legal detailed work that we need to do, not only to ensure that refugees are entitled to join higher education, but also the large amount of work that we need to do and the many negotiations that we have with host country universities for credit transfer, credit recognition, credential verification, verification of authenticity of refugee documents. Many of them have left their country of origin, obviously in great haste. They haven't always carried their documents with them, or the documents are in poor shape or only partially available. And I think this is a problem that has also and already been addressed by European universities, and the University of Geneva has initiated also a procedure whereby the verification of refugee credentials undergoes a slightly different process than the one that a normal University of Geneva students would undergo. So that, I hope, will allow you to understand a little bit more about the context in which the University of Geneva InZone works. We do not work regularly in urban contexts. And there's a good reason for that. Part of it is that camps are rather self-contained, making it possible for us to build higher education spaces in an urban context that is much more difficult. And the entire management of a higher education space in an urban setting is quite different, also from a legal point of view. So for right now, we have specialized in camps and are moving forward with that expertise and trying to address also the needs of internally displaced persons meaning moving inside countries of conflict such as Somalia and Syria, and working in IDP camps. So that kind of gives you the overview. Now, for the purpose of this particular webinar, I thought it might be of interest to you to see how we have tried to capitalize on open educational resources in conjunction with discussions and negotiations inside our own institution, but also in collaborating with other higher education institutions to incrementally build up a learning pathway for a refugee in a camp. What I'm showing you here is really the learning pathway that we have built in a Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, meaning it is set within the larger Kenyan requirements on what universities would be expecting from a refugee learner if that learner were to transfer to this national institution, bringing credits from the University of Geneva with him or her. This, as you can imagine, is not a straightforward process at all. And we incrementally build a course package that you see here on the second slide here, which tried, after a very careful needs analysis, tried to really focus on what are the topics and what are the needs that refugee learners in this particular camp would have, and how can we meet that need with the resources that we have. And so we obviously don't have resources across the board, and we obviously don't have an unlimited amount of those resources. So essentially what we built was a package of courses that you see up on top. Four of them come, well, four of them come from us, from the University of Geneva. They're built around MOOCs. And two of them come from partner institutions, one from Princeton and the other one from MIT, with whom we have carefully crafted a transfer procedure whereby the University of Geneva actually provides the academic credit for the coursework that is being done in collaboration with these two partner universities. So this package of 6 courses, and each course has a research component attached to it, goes into a degree that we built together with Kenyatta University, a bachelor's degree in international relations that lasts 8 semesters. You can do it in anywhere between 2.5 to 4 years, depending on how fast you go. And one of the very critical junctures, especially this year, has been how Kenyatta University, that obviously has its own very strict regulations as to how students are admitted and what they need to provide evidence of. But ultimately, we succeeded in bringing this course package into the curriculum of the bachelor's degree. The degree is owned by Kenyatta. It is not a degree of the University of Geneva, but we collaborate obviously very intensely with Kenyatta University on it. And our course package, together with the research components, represents roughly 36 to 38% of the bachelor's degree. So that has been one of the most important learning pathways for students from the different camps in Kenya. Now, we've also tried to make sure, as a refugee's existence and, the question always lingers, well, is a refugee going to leave the camp? Is he or she going back to their country of origin? Are they going to move into an urban area? So you really have to build learning pathways with mobility in mind. And that means not building degrees that last so many years, which indeed we have done, but only on the basis of building blocks. Now, what we've done is we've taken the very same building blocks and we have rearranged them for those who would like to have some intermediate qualification. And we've packaged, in this case, and this will be approved later this year by the university, we've packaged them into certificates of open studies, which provide roughly between 11 and 14 European credit transfer credits. We have a human rights package, which is composed of our course in Introduction to Human Rights, Introduction to Children's Rights and Ethics. This is a bilingual package, so are all the other courses, by the way, in Kakuma run in English and in French. We have a very large Francophone refugee community. And on the right side, a rather innovative package in medical engineering, which combines our global health course, our basic medical training course, and our basic engineering course. And you may ask the question, well, why would we package these three together? In a refugee camp, you have needs that need to be met that are not obvious to anyone who doesn't live there. And we have learned by doing our needs analysis in these camps that the healthcare system, and the medical system as a whole is obviously a very important part of camp management and does have to meet a variety of needs with very, very low resources. The kinds of tools and the kinds of approaches in that particular field cannot necessarily be exported to a camp. We have different approaches in the north. We have a very rich infrastructure. We have tools, we have all sorts of resources, which you do not have in a camp. So the idea of the medical engineering package and the use of credits for that really was right from the start that anyone who wants to design and develop and ultimately build some of these medical devices needs to have skills that go across different disciplines, such as, in this case, health, medicine, and engineering. So these are the undergraduate pathways. And I'll take a somewhat deeper dive now into the basic medical course, which is composed of 3 modules and essentially provides the equivalent of the first year of medical school. We do this in collaboration with RAFT, which is a center at the University of Geneva that is specialized in telemedicine. And the way these courses are run is, again, we use a learning management system to just upload the course material. But these are not, we haven't yet wanted to adopt any kind of specialized platform, simply because in a low resource environment, access to those platforms, when you have very little connectivity, interrupted connectivity, is usually impossible. So we do have the materials on there. We also offload all the materials on site in the camps on our local servers, but the actual course environment, the learning environment, runs on technical tools such as WhatsApp, that are accessible to everyone, that work 24 hours a day, and clearly provide the kind of ongoing learning opportunities to our refugee learners. And they provide also the essential tool for interaction between the graduate students at the University of Geneva, who are the online tutors, and the facilitators on site, who make sure that the students come to discussion sessions and work through the learning materials locally. So there really is a very strong face-to-face component locally, but globally or internationally or at a distance, clearly the support that comes from Geneva or from one of our partner universities is digital, as are the MOOCs that are usually the foundation for these courses. Although in the medical field, for the basic medical training, we have built our own courses simply because we needed to make sure that what we are covering really meets the needs in the camp itself. We also have, as you can see, the UNESCO sign on the bottom. Together with RAFT, we also have a chair UNESCO chair in digital medical education in a humanitarian context. So that provides us, with an extra kind of label of quality and ensures that, we do maintain not only a very high level of quality, but also ensure that learners who begin get all the way to the end and take their exams in the end. For the exams, professors do go to the field. Every professor has to come for at least a week into a refugee camp. Students do come. This is just now beginning to become a bit more regular. But professors go to the field, they run seminars, and then usually administer the final exam, either an oral exam or problem-based learning exam, depending on the topic. You may wonder why we have such a mix of, or such a blending of virtual and on-site. In part, this comes out of an understanding of the humanitarian context and the need of learners to actually have physical contact with those, not just with their peers, but also, with teachers. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that digital learning is not necessarily accepted, especially not in the Middle East. So, for example, in Jordan, any course that has a component of more than 25% delivered digitally will not be recognized. So we're really trying to document also how much in our courses is actually face-to-face and how the blending works to convince authorities also that it is not just straightforward upload, download digital, but there is a very, very important human element involved. There. I can also show you another example from our partner University Purdue that runs the Introduction to Engineering course, a highly popular course, both in the Middle East and in Kenya. And Purdue has, within its own institution, developed a sequencing, of course, for the course development, but also made sure that the students obtain regular academic credit and that this credit would be recognized either by local institutions in Kenya or by other institutions based on the criteria that this course fulfills with regard to the International Quality Assurance for Engineering Education. So we're working with the Deborah Lab. The Deborah Lab is highly specialized in engineering education in low resource environments, so really engineering for development. And some of the products of the course, either here or in Azraq, can be viewed on our website. You can see some photos there of what our refugee learners have developed. So moving perhaps to the second to last slide here on how we have other capacity development programs as the University of Geneva in zone. So we don't just work in camps. We also have a global capacity building arm that with the objective of building of professional development for those engaged in education in emergencies. So education in emergencies is a very large field. Many of you may not ever have heard about it. I didn't before I came to it, but it is a very large field. It's also very well organized. There is a large international network called International Network for Education in Emergencies, and I invite you to go to their website. It's ine.org. And you will see they have about 16,000 members all over the world. We come together in specialized working groups, and we work on capacity building in the education and emergency sector. Education is increasingly becoming part of a humanitarian response. I think there is a general understanding that refugees and children need to get back to school as quickly as possible. although that does not necessarily relate or apply to higher education, because no, we don't usually come in the first 3 months. Usually we come into what is normally called a more protracted emergency and crisis setting, which is still humanitarian, but as I mentioned in the beginning, much more oriented towards sustainable development and building capacity also in countries that host refugees. Most of the refugees of the world are hosted in developing countries that are situated around the country that is in crisis and conflict. So on our global capacity building arm, we have certificates of advanced studies. These are graduate courses that we run. You can see here one on humanitarian interpreting, which is somehow how we started many years ago. And then one on education in emergencies, which we collaborate on with Save the Children, one on higher education emergencies, and one on digital learning in fragile contexts, which is a course that is in development and will launch in early 2020. So we are very much engaged now in trying to bring all of what we've learned in those contexts to a graduate course. And these courses are the second and third, so education emergencies and higher education in emergencies have a residential component, whereas digital learning in fragile contexts will not have a residential component, and humanitarian interpreting does not have a residential component either. We also offer non-credit bearing and non-formal higher education courses. Partly this has been the result of very careful thinking about how do we engage refugee learners in our courses, even if they do not have the credentials, even if they cannot prove that they are admissible into a higher education institution. So that was one dimension, one criterion for us to offer non-credit bearing and non-formal higher education. The other was also that these environments really require some very innovative thinking and some very creative thinking. So we are working on maker spaces. We are looking at theater and drama. We have just launched a fairly interesting and sizable sports program as part of our social emotional learning package and the psychosocial support that many of these learners need. So the non-formal courses have really attracted a considerable number of women who quite often do not bring the necessary credentials to really enter into formal higher education, and who sometimes just need a little more time to brush up on certain skills, be it language skills or just general thinking and writing and reading skills at an academic level. So that is the package that we offer there. And on this penultimate slide, I just wanted to show to you how we go about creating a bilingual learning environment. Obviously, as a French-speaking university, we're not going to parachute French courses into foreign settings. We have to be rather creative in the way that we respect language and culture. But to our knowledge, we are one of the very, very few, if not the only one, who really has taken language very seriously, and that right from the start. We have when we go and develop a new course, we go and do our needs analysis. We look at what is needed in this particular camp. We then try and bring together whatever open educational resources are already available. We go through a phase of translation of materials. Some of the materials will even be created in another language. We make sure that everything is vetted, and most of the translations are being done by refugees themselves. We then also launch an interpreter training course, knowing that many learners will not have the necessary language level to actually go through a higher education course. in a bilingual format. So we train interpreters to support course delivery on site. And in the transition to launch phase, where everything is vetted and verified, we then ultimately go to launch, where we create learner groups that are mixed in language, and where we assign interpreters to the various learner groups to support them for as long as they need this kind of support. We do make quite a few allowances on the language end. Sometimes exams are only oral because the level of written expression may not be up to the level of what we would require at the university. And so these are some of the compromises that we obviously have had to make and had to argue vis-a-vis the university authorities, of course, as well. But I thought I would include this because it is a fairly unique feature of what we do and how we respect language and culture. So that brings me kind of to the end, and obviously always the many thank yous to not only the team, but also to our refugee learners and those who manage our learning spaces in the camps. We are almost entirely refugee managed, which again is kind of a novelty. It's a model that we've built up and does obviously continues to evolve. We obviously collaborate with those UN agencies and international NGOs that focus on education and emergencies. We're members of relevant networks such as the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies or the Connected Learning and Crisis Consortium, which we co-lead with UNHCR. But we are also highly appreciative, obviously, of all of our donors who fund us in the various refugee camps to make, basically to have sustainable impact and development of higher education spaces there. So I'll stop here, and I'm obviously ready to answer any questions. I know it was perhaps quite a bit on a few slides, but I hope it provoked some questions.
Thanks, Barbara. That was very clear presentation and interesting format that serves the purpose of the specific target groups here. Yeah, I would like to ask the participants for questions or reflections. Yeah, please, Pete.
Yeah. So again, this was a very nice presentation, shedding a completely new light on the potential of blended education for refugees, but also more broadly for development collaboration. So that's really a very good example, which should be better known, I think, by your colleague university, the universities in the Coimbra group, and I don't know if you have presented there already. It is very interesting. The one question I had is this: how many students do you reach in this scheme, and do you think that this operation is more scalable even than you do now?
So it depends on the camp. In Kakuma refugee camp, where we have built up the largest operation, we're currently serving around 250 students. Not all at the same time, but it sometimes varies from semester to semester, but that is roughly the number. The Dadaab refugee camp has been an extremely challenging context for political reasons. We've been invited out a couple of times simply because every time there's a terrorist attack, obviously all eyes are on Somalia, all eyes are on Al-Shabaab, all eyes are on Dadaab refugee camp as a breeding ground possibly for terrorists, so then everyone has to leave. So our operation there has really kind of remained a bit more limited, and We have, however, fortunately found a way to remain by focusing entirely on medical and health. So there seems to be no question on part of the government or anyone else that health and medical education are extremely important. So ever since we kind of limited it to that, we have been out there. We serve roughly about 30, 40 students. Again, it varies a bit, although we're now trying to see how with partner universities who have experience in the DAB. There's one consortium, one Canadian consortium, borderless higher education for refugees that have quite a bit of experience. And then Kenyatta University has a DAB campus, so to speak. So I think with those three universities, we're hoping to build a blended learning environment and virtual mobility for the students, credit transfers, and we know each other very well. So we do believe that this will be feasible as long as we can find a donor to support it, but we don't think that that will be very difficult. In Azraq refugee camp, it's the newest site. We started in 2016. We are currently roughly up to 100 in a camp where we obviously could serve a lot more. But we are just now building a joint, well, not a joint degree, because we don't like to do that. We really like for the local universities and national universities to own the degrees. We are much more interested in the credit transfer than getting involved in national legislation about building joint degrees. And I think we all know how long that takes in our own institutions. So we're taking the somewhat not just easier route, but also what we feel is the much more responsible route of development. We're building capacity, helping these universities to build capacity. Globally, we have been inundated. The topic of higher education emergencies seems to have really caught on like wildfire. Last year, we were serving 100 students in our summer school alone, which we ran for the first time outside of Geneva. We ran it in Nairobi and 1 week in Kakuma refugee camp. So the students, they were not refugees, but they had to live in the camp for a week. And so this year we had to run 2 sessions because there was such a demand. And this year we're going to Jordan in September, and it will be 1 week in Amman and 1 week in Azraq refugee camp. So we really try to contextualize our graduate degree courses, most of which are happening online, but with a residential component in an appropriate setting.
Thanks, Barbara. I would like to take the opportunity to ask Olga to also join by video and microphone as our panel member. Yes, Olga. Hello, Olga. Yes. She's at the Open University of the Netherlands and is participating in and representing a project called OpenVM, for which we had yesterday a presentation by Ilona Boegum. Olga, you indicate very impressed by the example from Barbara. Now, any reflections or comments by you on the example just now?
Yeah. Hello, and Barbara, just let me start with thanks. I'm very grateful to just follow this example in such details. It's a very impressive and important development from all the perspectives, humanitarian, but also sustainable development. And it opens a different perspective on virtual mobility, as we've been discussing it in the OpenVM project. And I would think that OpenVM, as we define it, so just focusing on specific virtual mobility skills and developing micro MOOCs, really tiny elements of learning to support learners in their quest in their learning adventure in this virtual mobility global world is an opposite to what you are trying to tackle, and because it's a huge humanitarian issue, and the solution that you found focusing on a specific domain, a health domain, I think that it's brilliant. I really I think I have the impression that I learned a lot from it, and the question that I have is, how do you see these two dimensions, something very, very easy to do and learnable, about how you collaborate with others, or how do you work with your digital skills, something very, very micro level, and this graduate course that is done from Geneva at a distance, and it is followed by students in really most difficult situation, something that I cannot even imagine. So how do you see this, these two dimensions in relation to each other? So that's what.
Yes, well, thank you, Olga, and well, thank you also for your very kind comments on the work that we're doing. And I just remembered I actually did not quite finish my response on the scaling, but I'll weave it into my reply here. It is a very challenging question. That we're basically wrestling with ourselves now, that we feel we have developed something that that yes does meet a need, is responsible, is culturally and linguistically sensitive, and certainly is a far cry from kind of what I sometimes call, somewhat brutally, digital colonialism, because it would be easy to just parachute something in and just require everyone to learn English. And I mean, we see enough of those initiatives as well, but that's not really how you build back better. I do feel that one of the excellent pieces of advice that I received early on, or recommendations, was from our former rector, who kept saying that the project will only survive if the students of the University of Geneva or the partner universities are also engaged. So there has to be, it has to be a two-way street. The learners in the field in these very, very difficult contexts, but also the learners in Geneva or at Princeton or elsewhere, or at Purdue. And I think that really has generated within our team a lot of discussion about what kind of learning ecosystem can we develop. And that's obviously the subject of a whole other presentation. I didn't really want to go into it because it really does require, going into the whole pedagogical approach and the ethics approach and the humanitarian principles and how we how we build it. So making sure that there is something in this approach for everyone, the refugee learners, the University of Geneva students, the professors, the donors, the partners on site, I think has really allowed us to build the kind of buy-in that you need, because you cannot just go to a refugee camp and say, well, here I am and I'm going to offer this. It's a highly regulated kind of environment, and I think thinking big in terms of who are your stakeholders and how you're going to meet their needs, some more, some less, obviously. That's I think one of the key things that we're now beginning to publish about. And yes, we've been a little bit slow in publishing because we've been so busy doing and developing and fixing things that don't work and trying again and discarding some approaches and moving into others. But that's kind of the long and maybe a longish answer to your question. And on the scaling side, I should say, I'm quite honest. The scaling is one of the biggest questions that we're facing now, because we think we've got it figured out. We think we've got a reasonably good model that kind of aligns with the values that we have. But scaling quality is very, very, very difficult. And you know, finding that right balance between staying small and doing quality versus, well, you know, we could admit hundreds more students, but do we have the resources for that? You know, do we have the capacity in the field for that? Do we have the capacity here in Geneva for that? That's one of the questions we need to ask ourselves. And the other question is, if we really now are tackling the very, very, you know, dangerous frontiers of going inside a country in conflict into IDP camps, whether that's Syria or Somalia, or whether these are detention centers in Libya, we really need to learn how to work, you know, with somebody on the ground. Yeah, it's not us going there. And that means we have to have a compact version of our model that ultimately then requires somebody to implement it together with us, whose values are aligned with ours. And I'm not going to go into the humanitarian enterprise and its politics and its policies and everything else. This is not an easy enterprise to navigate. And so this is kind of where we're at, where we're thinking we do need to do this. We were lucky enough to win a coveted spot in the No Lost Generation Tech Summit in Amman next month. So we're one of 20 recognized innovations and innovative projects in the Middle East. And this is where donors and agencies are going to come and, you know, talk to you and see, you know, how they can take your models. So we'll see. We are working feverishly on a good reply, but also I think some of us wish to remain the incubator innovator, and some of us, do feel that we have a responsibility to think about the scaling part now and to really come up with a workable solution.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for this answer. And I understand completely why writing is not the first priority, but you need to describe this in various sources, and probably R2 and Empower series is a very suitable start, because it's very low threshold and accessible source, open source. Because this is not only an inspiring example, but it's also a very useful model for others to learn from. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you also for the recommendation. We'll definitely follow up on that. Thank you, Olga.
Thanks. Anyone from the participants who would like to have a comment or question? Could also be about Olga's representing the OpenVM project. I know some of the, but I believe I see some familiar names here who were attending yesterday's session by Ilona Boegum on the OpenVM project, which is represented by Olga today. Olga has been working on the skills, the skills for virtual mobility that were presented yesterday. I myself yesterday was left with a question, Olga, that is, I saw the research and the results of the research on the skills, and I was wondering about these VM skills. To what level do they overlap with physical mobility skills, and to what level are they distinctive?
The question, George, just to to remind you that in a study we consult experts in different countries and collected their input and let them also sort and evaluate the statements about important, relevant skills and competences that are involved in virtual mobility. And we came up with a list of 7 areas to which we added virtual mobility as an area, just as a knowledge area. So these 8 competence areas are of course related to what happens in the physical world, and at the same time different. And to start with the metaphor, so we know collaborative learning, we know what it is, and we also have different models and experiences in higher education, but also in all other educational domains. But we also have computer-supported collaborative learning, which is also working together with others, but with using technology, and technology becomes also a member of this constellation. So physical and virtual are related, and these relations are manifold. That's how I would answer in short. I would think that in a physical mobility context, with students going to a different country, studying there, the experience is extremely immersive in all contexts. So they have to live somewhere, they have to eat, they enjoy architecture, they enjoy the scenery, they enjoy very many different immersive, they have different immersive experiences. In the virtual world, which is also a rich world, but rich in different ways, they also have to find their way and to experience different approaches to education, different ways you contact a professor, you communicate with others, you complete your task, whatever. Just I'm giving some examples, but it is similar but different. So in a simple way, this is my answer. I wonder whether Barbara would have different things about just taking the perspective of students from the University of Geneva participating, and they do not move physically to other continents, but they surely experience this mobility.
Well,
I resume, yeah.
Yeah, just about bringing it back to just the context that that Inzon works in at the University of Geneva. I mean, I'm really very keenly interested in your in your understanding, well, not understanding, but in your opinion of the relative importance of the physical collaboration as compared to virtual collaboration. I mean, in our regular student cohorts, it seems to me, at least, that a larger percentage of digital collaboration would be acceptable, and that perhaps the physical collaboration does not have, the same kind of value, or doesn't occupy the same place, or isn't as important as it would be in a refugee context. Because a lot of that thinking went into our own development of our learning ecosystem, which we populate with quite a large number of people, making sure that there is sufficient physical contact, that the students get together locally, but that, on a daily basis via WhatsApp, they have their contact digitally, with their tutors in Geneva. So we really try and balance it out, simply because we know that the psychosocial support that we somehow need to provide via our pedagogical approach is so essential in those contexts, and that we work in. So I don't know, for us, the face-to-face remains really absolutely essential, according to our experience and to what our students are telling us and what we see in retention rates. We had really very, very poor retention rates in the beginning. We lost maybe 80% of our students in some of the first courses. It was terrible. It was not until, you know, we tinkered with the balance of physical, you know, collaboration, which, yes, came with a paid meal in the refugee camp where rations had been severely cut. So students come in hungry at 10 o'clock in the morning. They're hungry. They have had no breakfast. Rations have been cut. So you need to take all these elements and you need to think, okay, how can we tackle you know, the retention issue? So there were different design elements that we played around with, including providing a meal. But that was not the only thing we tinkered with. But we really tinkered with that balance of the, you know, like our online tutors. There are at least 2 or 3 to each course. So for a cohort of about 25 students, we have at least 2 or 3 online tutors. And they take turns because we prepare them very well. They have to go through training at our end. And when you go on our website, you will see some public goods, meaning e-learning courses that we have developed on facilitator education and tutor education for fragile contexts. They're freely downloadable. This is what our donors oblige us to do. We develop something for the public good, and it needs to be freely accessible. So, you know, we train those students, but still, even interacting with the students in a refugee camp can leave them rather shocked. There are messages coming out that they don't really understand. So it really has to, we really have to make sure that we're in constant contact and that even via a very cheap tool like WhatsApp, you know, we can exploit that tool in many, many different ways. But I would be very interested in a comparison between, you know, regular contexts of the importance and relative place of the physical collaboration and, you know, contexts such as ours.
Wow, what a question. Barbara, I have to use my experience as a teacher in distance education, where we start courses which run only online with a day to meet each other, and in some situations we have another meeting later in the course. But this starting day and just learning how what we are, and just making the first contact and making some small talk to start with are essential moments of building trust within the learning community that has to go through a course and learn and interact in different ways. And this is a very, very normal and ordinary situation, nothing that extraordinary as what can draw people together in a refugee camp. Just seeing that we're all normal humans with our expertise, with our abilities, and with our commitment, and with our backgrounds, just sharing these backgrounds. Sometimes we start online before the course, but then there comes this moment of meeting each other and saying, "Oh, I know you from WhatsApp, but now I see you in person." So it's not a teaching learning moment in most direct way, but it's just a human interaction moment, which is very important. And in some also regular situations, closer to a test, to assessment, it's also important to just interact in real life, seeing each other. it's not what I meant in the beginning, speaking about immersion, just feeling the city or feeling the nature, just things that young people value when they go on Erasmus Plus or Erasmus tour to different countries. This is, in my way, luxury that Western civilization can afford, and we are lucky to be part of it. But it's not comparable with what young people in those camps have to go through to survive. So, but still, this combination of physical and virtual, and this looking for blends that work is an important also design lesson for us. I think that it's very good that we talk about it in sessions like this.
Thanks very much. And indeed, what you indicate here, Olga, about the reference to the design is important, not only about the mobility aspect as such, but as part of the design of the course. Any other comment on that? Maybe Pete, you want to indicate something on that?
No, I am simply impressed, and I have learned a lot today listening to Barbara and also to Olga. So thank you for that. But yeah, to connect with the last remark about design, we think also we had a task force, and Barbara was a member of the task force. That design is a very important thing, educational design. Also when collaborating with other countries, and even mobility is also a matter of design, and that's often forgotten in our own European context. For European universities, and I think about my own university as well as other Coimbra Group universities. Well, mobility is a value in itself, and so I think it's not. It has a value when it is part of the design of your course and your curriculum. And yeah, that's often forgotten. But when you involve also online learning or blended learning, yeah, then you must think about design. So that's the advantage of having this context. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? I see. No, thanks. Okay, then I think we have come to the end of this presentation and panel session at the end. I would like to thank Olga and Barbara for your contributions to this. I would like to thank also the participants. I would like to point out that we have another webinar week in the week of, let me see, oh, it's not on this list. It's the end of June. We will send you details on that. It's on blended education. I believe it's the week of the 20th of June, and but you're all on the list for further information that we will send out. So thanks again, and we hope to see you again at the next webinar week.